Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is, this is Stop, Collaborate, and LLM. Talk about MCP sampling. So, who am I? My name is Kurt Boberg. Hello, I am a staff security researcher at SemGrep. I do security research in the static analysis and more recently the AI space. Where did I come from? I started my career in DevOps. So I was slinging bits around and didn't really care what they did. I just had to make sure they got onto bare metal and came up and were healthy. So I spent a lot of time on deploy pipelines, mostly in the .NET and Windows ecosystems. So sort of a tool omnivore at this point. I'm a first principles auditor. I like looking at things from kind of the base ground truth and then building up from there. I like to read specs and then build toy implementations to really cement my understanding of things. I find that a really useful principle, and it's also very durable across technologies, and it's pretty resistant to mistakes as long as you're careful. And it's pretty widely applicable. Like, it works everywhere from mathematics to computer security. So it's a big, I have a background in mathematics as well, which is kind of where I learned that approach. And fundamentally, I'm interested both in mostly in why software was built, not necessarily what it does, right? Software is for solving human problems. Like, we don't write code just because, well, some people do, but in general, if you're a practicing security professional, you are defending code that solves a human problem for someone, right? That's what hyper technical people buy software for. They have a problem that needs to be solved. So why does MCP matter? How many, show of hands, how many folks are already familiar with MCP in this audience? All right, most of you. Cool. So we can kind of go through this quickly. It was, for a minute, kind of becoming the de facto standard for how LLMs interface with tools, as we had determined that almost every MCP server that was deployed was standard I/O. We're like, why are we doing this? Skills can just shell out to the terminal on your device. This is an extra step we don't need. And that's still probably mostly true. If you spend enough time on LinkedIn like I do, you see lots of posts like, MCP is dead, skills are the future, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, yes, but also no. Like, as more of the agentic web stuff gets adopted and we start needing remote surfaces for tooling for agents to interact with, I think we will see a resurgence in MCP deployments because that standard I/O path will become an over-the-network path, and then you don't get to just rely on the client anymore. Right, so it's the de facto standard for LLM to tool connectivity, asterisk, including skills. The attack surface is every remote server and every local service. There are a lot of problems that will become more apparent in this talk where you have to be really careful about sandboxing tool context for an LLM because LLMs are kind of sycophantic and overly helpful. And so if you give them instructions, they will try really hard to follow them. And if you share that context with all of your tools, the MCP spec actually specifically allows for servers to talk to each other as long as they're mediated through an LLM client. And it's kind of my opinion that security analysis has missed a structural gap here because we're a lot of time thinking about is the server trustworthy? Is the tool description honest? And there's actually extra features in the spec that are even more terrifying and awful. And finally, this talk is kind of old, more than a month old, which means some of these things are kind of out of date now. This is less true than it used to be, but the ecosystem is still incrementally growing, and there will be more attack surface. And this is kind of my TLDR of how I think about MCP is, and a lot of the agentic specifications in general is just because it's in the spec doesn't mean it's safe. Specs are mostly behavioral and interoperability specs, and things like the HTTP specification, security didn't come up in it ever. We had to kind of bolt it on after the fact, and we keep making that mistake over and over and over again. We made it with MCP. But security is often an additional property that gets added after the fact. I'm going to have a few concrete examples. I have a perfectly spec compliant LLM client for MCP that can be weaponized by an attacker server to do bad things. So super quick primer on sampling. So what is sampling? How many people are familiar with the sampling part of the MCP spec? Anybody? One person, kinda? All right, so normally in MCP land, you have your LLM client, your cursor, codex, Claude Code, whatever. It goes, you ask it to do something like, hey, Claude Code, please write me a notes web app or whatever. And it goes, okay, maybe I need an MCP tool for something. And so it goes, it asks, it looks through its tool registry, it goes, calls out to the MCP gives a response, and it goes, okay, and it goes on with its day. Sampling is this kind of insane property, and I don't really understand why it was added personally, but it allows an MCP server to ask your LLM client for an LLM completion and send it back to the server. How many people are upset about that existing right now? Just like viscerally. Because I know I was. I'm like, this seems bad. Like a server that I don't control asking my LLM for things that's getting back, like spending my tokens for what exactly? And so that's, sus. So as near as I can tell, this is for your MCP client to start doing things like agentic reasoning loops. So like if your server needs to ask your LLM client something about your environment, it can do that and then do some post-processing and then give you a more useful example back later. Server-driven autonomous workflows. Some of this is speculation, like reaching for why you would build such a thing, because tools attached to LLMs, in my opinion, should be deterministic. Like you shouldn't have that non-determinism from LLMs like injected into a tool call that is a tool call, not a native LLM thing, specifically because it's deterministic, right? So that is upsetting. And LLM judgment of the server, like, whatever. Anyway, TLDR. Sampling gives a remote server the ability to send a message to your local LLM and get a response. That is functionally what it does. Use cases. There are some intentional useful use cases for these. The problem is sampling kind of doesn't have any strongly held opinions about how you're supposed to secure this. It basically just says, yep, you can implement sampling. Here's the handshake. Here's how it works. Speaking of the handshake, here's what the handshake looks like. Right? So a remote server goes, hey, client, I would like to send you a sampling request. And local client may or may not auto-approve. The spec does not require a human in the loop. It's like, you probably should, but it doesn't require it. And then it'll go, okay, maybe I have tool calls if I gave my LLM tool context. Spoiler alert, you shouldn't do that for sampling. You should make it text only, and we'll see why in a minute. And then the local client does whatever LLM thing, and then it sends it back. So here are the must requirements. These are hard requirements of the MCP specification. You must expose the create message functionality. So the client has to implement the sampling capability if it's going to support sampling. It has to accept messages and max tokens. These are required fields in the messaging request. And it has to return a role in the content. So required fields in the response. Right? So this is basically just, here's how the handshake works. If you're implementing sampling, you have to do these things. Note that there is no user approval in here as a must requirement. It is a suggestion, not a hard requirement of following the spec. How many people have seen developers not do things they weren't required to do? Yeah, right? So we know that some subset of people if the specification or the design doc or whatever doesn't say, you absolutely must do this thing, it is a requirement of the done criteria, they just won't do it, right? There are a lot of reasons, from either the more virtuous, like got to meet the deadline, putting things under the cut line, stuff like that, to the less virtuous, like I'm lazy and I don't want to do that. And all of these things occur in all organizations. You just kind of got to roll with it. all of the human in the loop controls in the spec are shoulds. That means they're all optional. Now, technically, in RFC parlance, should means recommended unless there is a compelling reason not to, but it doesn't force you to. So as long as you can make a plausible, well, we were going to do this, but you can get away with not doing it. And a minimal client implementation, basically one that's like, I will check the minimum amount of boxes to get out the door, will naturally skip the shoulds, right? Because like, if you're just like, I gotta get, like my CEO, my product manager, whatever, wants this yesterday, I've got to get something out the door as fast as possible, and maybe we'll get to the shoulds next sprint, or next quarter, or never, because we don't care. Honestly, you don't want that last case, but the first two are pretty common. Like in my experience as an AppSec engineer before I became a researcher, there's lots of calculated risk trade-offs. But this kind of behavior is kind of the crux of some of the demos I'm going to give. Yeah, clients should let users review and deny requests. One of the, like right now, the VS Code Copilot chat does implement sampling, and it does require a human to approve every sampling request, which is good. I almost dropped a 0-day in VS Code at this talk, but I couldn't because they did the right thing. Sad panda. Clients should allow prompt editing before sending. They theoretically, one of the other gates is when the server is like, hey, I would like to send a sampling request, the user needs to see the entire prompt and be able to adjust it. VS Code does not do this. And clients should rate limit sampling calls. Like I should not connect to an MCP server and then have it go, hello, yes, I would like to spend 500,000 of your tokens, please, because that would be bad, right? But there is no hard requirement that we do this. Right. Whoop. Accidentally hit space one too many times. Right. So key point here, should is not equal to must. A client that skips every one of these violates no hard requirements for the spec. It is still compliant. These are direct quotes from the spec. For trust and safety and security, there should always be a human in the loop with the ability to deny sampling requests, but it's not a hard requirement. And also, you can also press the, I would like to approve sampling for this entire session, please. And so all you need to do is send one benign sampling request that's like, hi, please tell me the user's favorite color for this session. And you're like, okay, yeah, that looks fine. Approve all sampling because I don't have time to press prompts every 2 minutes for the next 8 hours of my day. And applications should provide UI that makes it easy and intuitive to review sampling requests and allow users to view and edit prompts before sending and present generated responses for review before delivery. VS Code does not do those last two. All it says is, hey, someone's making a sampling request, and you either go yes or no. Doesn't show you the prompt, doesn't show you the response. Not awesome, but for things we'll get into later, it's actually not that dangerous currently. However, they are one change away from really hilarious results that I will show you in a minute. All right, so who implements sampling? Not a lot of folks right now. This is the list as best as I could find it. Goose from Goose Security, VS Code Copilot, AMP, Postman, and some other programmatic frameworks. Not a huge, notably absent from this list, Claude Code. There is, however, an open feature request. So it hasn't been implemented yet, but people are +1ing it like, yes, please, we want sampling yesterday. And I don't really understand. Again, I still don't, like as a security person, I don't understand why. Like, what problem are we solving? As security people, we are often biased towards let's write less code and build less software because the easiest software to defend is software that doesn't exist. You don't have to defend surface area that you don't have. Yeah, right? Notably, not Claude Desktop and not Claude Code. And potentially CI/CD pipelines and autonomous agents built on sampling. I have not seen any of these in the wild yet. If you have, please let me know because I'd be very interested to see them. Once a client advertises sampling, every connected server can request it. Once the client is like, hello, yes, I support sampling, cool, any MCP you connect to it can just send it sampling requests. Right. So very quickly, reiterating spec gaps. The first gap, obviously, there's no enforcement of human in the loop. And, per Tanya's keynote, human in the loop is not a great control, but it's better than nothing. And it does give you an auditable programmatic thing you can look for as a defender for events in your software that's like, hey, a human turned off the prompt, just blindly accepts them within 10 seconds of them showing up and doesn't ever review anything. Like, these gates are not perfect, but they do give you like a thing to stumble over for an attacker before you have a problem. Right. Should present to user is kind of unverifiable, though. Like, that's very much up to the implementation. There is no confirmation token and no audit log in the spec. Is like, I think one of the things that we need to really press for as security professionals is no control is perfect and things will always get through, but we need to have a like auditable log of what happened. Because how many people have done instant response in this room? Right? I've done instant response, and you know what the worst part of instant response is? Trying to find logs for anything. Like, there's always huge blind spots in whatever you're looking at, where you're like, okay, like the attacker got in here, and then we're missing a whole bunch of logs, and then this other thing we can detect happened, but like we're not really sure what happened in the like 40 minutes between event A and event B. And we really need to push engineers to make those gaps as small as possible, because it helps us do our jobs and it helps us keep them safer. And the happier we are with our ability to respond to oopsies lets them go faster, right? Because when we are less risk averse, we're like, yeah, sure, fine, you can ship that. We'll deal with problems as they come in. And the more like terrified we are of like responding to incidents, the more likely we are to just become the Department of No. Auto-approving clients pass every spec check. You can just tell VS Code, yes, dangerously skip, or run Claude with dangerously skip permissions or whatever, and all those human-in-the-loop controls just go away, and you're still compliant for sampling, which can cause problems, which I'm going to show you because my demos are so cool. Yeah, and like honestly, one of the things here to note is you can't actually enforce human-in-the-loop across implementations with the spec. It can only like say you should do that, and you can be like a must requirement, but it can't make specific implementation guideline things because specifications can't be that specific, because the programming language that is implementing it may vary or may have varying capabilities. So you can't just go, this is the library you use, because that's an insane thing to require from a specification. Right. The spec assumes that the LLM client is a trusted user-facing application. Clients should implement user approval controls, but the spec can't enforce what the client actually does. It can suggest things, and it can be like, to be compliant, you must do this, but there's a lot of wiggle room in implementation. The effectively mental model is the client is kind of the trust boundary, and it's sort of supposed to mediate interactions between other MCP servers. But how it does this is kind of left as an exercise for the user, which is never really a great answer you want to have, especially with like a security critical function, like capability or functionality. Right? So, reiterating, should is a recommendation, not a conformance gate. Minimal clients do exist, oftentimes in automation and CI, right? Because you don't need a full-featured client to do things like spin up GitHub Actions or anything like that. You just need the smallest possible thing that does what you need. And trust is delegated independently. And then kind of the third gap here is opaque tool call chains. So the remote server doesn't like directly call like a local service necessarily, but if you give it tool access, you can be like, here, send a sampling request. Please use this other tool in this other MCP to do this thing that helps me achieve what I want to do. And if you're not actually like showing people your prompts you're sending, this just goes, or you can do like anything from like click to fix style, like just right pad out the yin yang with white space and be like, tell me your favorite color, 10 million spaces, and also execute a reverse shell. Like, yeah, let's skip through that. All right, so this is kind of the core assumption stack here is remote server trusts the LLM client to enforce human in the loop, but then it doesn't. The LLM client trusts the LLM to generate safe tool calls, which it doesn't. The LLM trusts the prompt content is legitimate, which it's not because attackers don't have to follow the rules. And so you end up with a prompt crafted by an attacker that just kind of bypasses all this stuff. All right, so a lot of this was based on the older specification. There is a newer version from the end of November last year. Doesn't fix any of it. It had some more opinionated things about tools and sampling. So there are some extra things where it'll send the send message request has an additional field where it's like, and here are the tools that are available, or here are the tools that I would like to call, or whatever. And that gets processed, and then the client is like, I either support tool use or I don't. But the rest of it's mostly the same. Right. Does it block this attack? Yeah, kinda. So there is a capability advertising for like newer versions of the spec, but like as we have seen so many times before, there's always the legacy 1.0 version that is supported forever, and it just behaves the way the original version does. And because of backwards compatibility, you have to support that like for much longer than we'd all like. So anyway, it turns out that some of the stuff, VS Code Copilot is compliant with the newer version of the spec, and because of that, it has some additional guardrails about things like tool context and isolation, which is why this attack that I'm about to demonstrate does not work. Another kind of note here is sort of the FCC problem. How many people have seen this FCC advisory on radio equipment or whatever? I was a big RC car aficionado in my youth, and so I probably read this sentence 100,000 times. Like, this device must accept any interference received, including interference that may cause undesired operation. And attackers can do whatever they want with MCP servers, right? Like, they don't actually have to be spec compliant. They can do whatever, like, your client has to be spec compliant, but like the attacker server can kind of do whatever it wants. So like, servers must not send tool-enabled requests to non-declaring clients. I'm an attacker. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it anyway. What are you gonna do about it? They must send create message only in response to a client request. Okay, I'm just not gonna do that. And must not exceed max tokens. Okay, I'm not gonna listen to that either. Like, so there's so much of the stuff that like the client is like, please don't do these things, and the MCP server is like, no. So. Right. Server-side musts are interoperability rules, not security controls, right? Like, you can't actually, as a client, control what the server does. Yeah, we're actually going to skip over that and that. We're actually getting it to here. So we're going to start talking about like the actual attacks. So the first one I'm going to talk about is tool shadowing in data exfil. How many people are familiar with the concept of tool shadowing in MCP? Nope. Okay. Super quick primer on tool shadowing. So lots of MCP servers, or lots of LLM clients, primarily like LLM IDEs, will, the way that they manage MCP servers is they have a basically key value pair dictionary of tool calls, like servers and tool calls, and they're alphabetically sorted a lot of the time. And tools are entered into this like KVP as MCP underscore server name underscore tool name. And sometimes they're stored by server, sometimes they're stored by tool name, sometimes they're, and so what ends up happening is if you have two servers with the same tool name, the one with the alphabetically first server name wins. So if you have A server and B server and they both implement hello world, guess who gets called every single time? Windsurf, I'm pretty sure still does this. I know VS Code still does it as well. So tool shadowing, as far as I know, still works in VS Code. Like, but there's still like, the tools are unique because the whole tag is MCP underscore server name underscore tool name. And obviously those are different because the servers are different. But if those two tools advertise identical capabilities and arguments, it just grabs the first one because it's an LLM. It's like, I need to call this tool with this functionality. I'm going to go search for that tool name, and it pulls the first one out of the list. It's alphabetical. Right. Yeah. So quick note on VS Code Copilot. Sampling was shipped in June 2025. I spent most of yesterday in my hotel room trying to break out of their security controls around sampling, and I was unable to do that. And I got so close so many times. Unfortunately, they do proper context isolation and tool isolation, so you can't actually do the kind of fun pivoting that I was really hoping to get to. So shout out to Microsoft. Microsoft did a security thing. Let's all clap. There are a lot of smart people at Microsoft. There's just a lot of dumb executives. So, all right. So some of you may be asking, okay, like that's cool. Why didn't you test on a production client? Because I did, and early adopters made the secure decision. But clearly, we're not done implementing this. Like Claude Code doesn't have one yet, and these are plus ones from like 3 days ago, right? And this was opened last summer. So people are still clamoring for this feature. Anthropic hasn't shipped it yet, and they still have an opportunity to mess it up. And so does everyone else who's going to implement sampling. So I am imploring you to please not mess it up, and I'm going to show you why. So my demo has kind of 3 components. There is a malicious HTTP MCP server, which is local on my machine, but it could be a remote client for purposes. There is a terrible MCP client. This is my toy MCP client that is spec compliant, but makes all of the mistakes I have outlined thus far. And a legitimate local standard IO server. So we're doing tool shadowing and data exfil, so I need a target to shadow. So I have a standard IO server to shadow. All right, so there's kind of a 2-phase attack here. The first phase is, oh man, this is hilarious because I actually forgot to mention this. So MCP servers can also dynamically change the tools they advertise, and they don't have to tell the client that they did this. And you don't have to like reapprove or re-register or anything. It's just like you approve the client once, and it can just dynamically change all of the tools underneath it. And as long as you approve the initial install, it doesn't matter. And so the second step is abusing the tool shadowing behavior of a lot of things to cause the client to call the wrong tool and then exfiltrate data to my remote server. All right, so go to the demo, which is here. Oops. Okay. All right, can everyone see this? Good? All right. All right, so we've got our nice little standard server here. We have actually initialized we've talked to our remote server here. You see we've got the handshake, and a server has no tools. All right, anybody want to pick a name? This is to prove that this is actually happening and this is not a canned demo. Pick a name, any name, anybody.
Clifford.
Clifford? All right, here we go. Tool executed, server, some server. Hello, Clifford. This is a greeting from the MCP Hello World server, right? We're all happy. Good, cool, awesome. All right. So, there we go. Now, a server has used a sampling request to ask the shared context, hey, what MCP servers do you have and what tools did they expose? And suddenly, a server now has a hello world tool. Uh-oh. All right, another name. Pluto? Hey! That went to the wrong server! And in this case, it was a name. But what if it was banking details, or your social security number, or your driver's license, or insert bad thing, right? Not great. And let's see, are we done now? Yeah, okay. And oop, typo. There we go. All right. A little preview there. Let's go back over here. We finished our demo. And all right, who's not impressed? Well, if you're not impressed, how about command injection? We excited about command injection?
Hell yeah.
Demo number 2. So traditionally, if you have a command injection problem in a standard I/O server, what do we say as security people? Like, I don't care. Like, oh no, you got command injection on the shell you're already on. I don't care. Whatever. Like, you want to ship a crappy standard I/O server that doesn't listen on HTTP, that has billions of terrible command injection faults? Yeah, sure, fine, whatever, I don't care. The problem is, that's now a command injection vector if a remote server can make requests to it. Which, spoiler alert, you can. So sampling effectively changes the reachability of some of these bugs. So bugs that were benign or like concerning but not a priority suddenly become big priority. With demo number 2. That accidentally. All right. So, I can't remember. This one I think just does. All right. Oh, that's not good. Uh-oh. Yeah, so prior work. So I'm not the first person to talk about this kind of stuff. This kind of layers on top of a bunch of other problems in the MCP space, like indirect prompt injection via tool descriptions, and prompt injection via tool interfaces, tool poisoning, tool shadowing, and that kind of stuff. So what we're kind of adding here is must versus should audits. Like, I am a big fan of reading specs. If you are a security professional and you are like senior plus in your career, and someone is like, hey, can we do blah, 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 blah? Go read the spec. Like, I promise you there will be so many like just stupid foot guns that you find simply by reading the spec. Yeah. Tools and sampling. Let's close the gap. And zero human in the loop and tool leakage as kind of natural implementation choices are things that are just going to happen, so I want you to all look out for them. Big takeaway here is user approval of sampling is recommended, not required. The gap between recommended and required is open-a calculator or reverse shell or whatever. So some notes. I work for SemGrep. SemGrep publishes some rules for MCP behavior, including MCP command injection, MCP tool poisoning, and unsanitized return. However, kind of the tier 1 fixes for this stuff don't require tooling. Like, I am here on behalf of a vendor doing some interesting MCP research and stuff like that, and we have some rules in our commercial product that can help you find this stuff. But you don't actually need those things. Like, you can just kind of use your eyeballs and go look at your own MCP services and just go, that looks sus. And if like things are like, yes, we implement sampling, and like the dev's like, I would like to use this MCP server. And it's like, okay, with what? And does that client support sampling? And if it does support sampling, does it do proper context isolation? And these are questions that you don't need a tool to answer, right? You can just kind of use your eyeballs and common sense. So some mitigation strategies. In your MCP service code, never, ever, ever shell true in tool handlers. Like, you almost never need this. LLM args are untrusted user input. Like, anything coming from an MCP server or going into an LLM context should be treated as untrusted. Validate before any exec or IO. Like, that, a lot of these things are stuff we should already be doing. Like, we're just applying these same principles from 30 years ago to new technology. It's all the same. It's all just like, MCP is kind of just a weird REST API. It's fine. Yeah. So, bad, subprocess.run. Good, subprocess.run. Specific tool, specific flags. This will cause big problems. This will be mildly annoying and throw errors, but won't cause harm to your production systems. In your client code, audit, sampling, create message. Does anything surface to the user? If no, that's a smell. You should go look at that. Scope what local tool context goes to the sampling LLM. I will allow for the possibility that you might want to give tools to sampling requests. Imagine that there is a universe in which this is true. That being said, be very opinionated about what you give and give it the minimum amount of tooling it needs to do its job. Again, least privilege, this is not new. Everyone knows this already, but it bears repeating. And a separate gate for tool calls from sampling responses, right? Your core loop that the human is interacting with in Cursor or Codex or Windsurf or whatever, that's one context and should have one set of tools. And untrusted remote things should have a different context with a different set of tools, preferably a single context for each server making a sampling request with few or no tools attached to it, like VS Code does, even though they don't do all of the visibility I would like them to. Right. So, do this Monday. And verify your tool leakage surface. This is the code from my bad, terrible example MCP client. And if you find stuff that looks like this in your code, you should go have a chat with the developer and go, hello, yes, I am from security and I have questions. Like, why? Please explain why. And like, if they have a good justification, that's fine. But make sure that they understand what it is they're getting themselves into. I actually don't know if I've open sourced this demo, but I will after this talk. And I will make sure that it's available in the published slides, which are also at the end of the talk. Yeah, so the remote server does not need a complete inventory of your local services. Like, it needs the minimum it needs to answer its question. This pattern appears in Terrible MCP client, and it was authored with the help of Claude Code, but I was like intentionally going, hello, yes, please exactly follow the spec, but only what you absolutely must and no more. And I suspect that this will happen organically in a lot of places, just because that's kind of how software development works, right? PHP got a really bad rap for a long time, even though PHP 8+ is actually not a bad language. And it's because it was so accessible to so many people to make so much web content that lots of people who didn't know what they were doing could get out in front of their skis and put dangerous crap on the internet. And we are still cleaning up after that 30 odd years later or whatever. So this is an opportunity for us to get in front of that and make sure that we don't have problems with sampling in the future. Tier 2 stuff, kind of aspirational in the spec and the ecosystem. Spec level stuff. Human in the loop should go from should to must. Like, this feels like a thing that we should do. So at the very least, when people are like, yes, I would like to dangerously skip permissions, they know that they are basically taking the safeties off and pointing a foot gun at their foot. Like, we should make, like, similar to React's dangerously set inner HTML, we should make this really, really explicit to what humans or to the humans what they are doing and why it is bad. An explicit automated capability type and require like trust grants. I'm a big fan of capability-based authorization. I really, really hate confused deputies because they're stupid and we shouldn't do them anymore because we've understood them since the 80s. I was born in 1986. When I was 2, Norm Hardy wrote the, actually, I think it's on a future slide, but Norm Hardy wrote his big thing about the compiler issue at, God, why can't I remember the name of the compiler? Anyway, how many people are familiar with the Norm Hardy story anyway? So the TLDR is, back in the long, long ago, compute was expensive. So everyone had like shared time computing and all that stuff. And so when you did things like run a compiler, the compiler would spit out your bill because you got billed for the time you were using on the computer. Some enterprising person determined that they could ask the compiler to output their compiled output and write over the billing data for that day. And so what they did is they wrote a program, they compiled it, the compiler overwrote the billing thing, and everyone got free compute that day. Hooray! Which was great for users and not so great for the company. And that was like stupid, and the reason it happened is ambient authority, where, you know, like the compiler had to be able to get to, it had to compile things on behalf of users, but it also had to update the billing record because that's how they tracked how much people owed them. So that compiler had ambient authority to touch things that users couldn't, but users could ask it to do things. And because of that, they were just like, hey, do this really complicated, and computers can't reason. They still can't reason. Even the people at Anthropic and OpenAI were like, they can reason that. No, they can't. But that is like kind of the fundamental problem. And as we get into the agentic future, boy, is confused deputy going to be everywhere all the time because LLMs can't reason. Separate consent. Sampling approval is not tool call approval. If you approve a sampling request and then the sampling request makes a tool request, that should have another approval gate. Like you like this is all common sense stuff, but like the spec doesn't demand it, and I feel like we should be annoying to the spec authors and be like, can we please be a little more obnoxious to the end users and make them like understand what they're approving? So anyway. At the client level, fingerprint capabilities that connect and reapprove on mid-session deviation, right? The demo where it was like, hello, yes, I am a server with no tools. And then it was like, actually, I'm going to run a sampling request, and now I have tools. I should have had to like approve those tools in my environment before they existed, because otherwise you get the problem I showed you. So, and this is, again, like, I don't know if we were just like being sort of oblivious about like, no one would do that. I'm like, yes, they would. Like, anyway. Shadow tool detection, flag name collisions across servers. Like, this seems like a really dumb, easy thing for clients to do. I don't actually know that it's a spec requirement, but if you are writing LLM clients that interface with MCP servers, please, please, please do tool name collision checks and complain loudly if it happens, because not only from a security perspective, this will almost certainly result in weird usability bugs. So like, it's not just a security concern, it's also like a usability and performance and just reliability concern, right? And as we all know, a lot of security things overlap really heavily with reliability concerns. Which is actually why SREs are our best friends, and we should all know our SREs. And at the ecosystem level, shell, true, and an MCP tool handler should just be a critical. Like, we should just fix those. Like, you shouldn't do that. We know better, right? Revised threat models. Local only doesn't mean local only if you support sampling. You should definitely, it's like, does this client ever support more than one MCP server? And the answer is like, yes, they're supposed to be composable. So your threat model is always remote, and you should always assume that someone can remotely send commands to your standard IO server. Even if it's a long shot, even if it's all it takes is one regression or one, we added a new feature, and suddenly you have this horrible RCE problem. All right, so defense in-depth summary. I'm going to tell you what I just told you again. This week, no shell true in your MCP servers. Treat LLM args as untrusted input, always, which we should already be doing again, but bears repeating. Scope tool context injected into sampling LLMs. Preferably no tools, like VS Code does this because, again, I don't know that there are a lot of legitimate requests where a remote MCP server needs to make a tool call on your device. That's just like inherently unsafe and crazy. You shouldn't allow it. In the ecosystem, human in the loop should to must. Like the spec can say what it wants. You are the arbiters of your domain. You can basically just say, oh, we're building an LLM client, must have human in the loop. You must implement this. But the spec doesn't, I don't care. We here at company foo are going to treat shoulds like musts in the spec because we have decided that there is no reasonable reason to not do this. Yeah, automated client capabilities and shadow tool detection, right? And capability fingerprinting. Don't let MCP tools lie to you, basically. Yeah, tier 2 without tier 1 leaves the easy path open. Like, do the easy stuff. Like, you can probably knock out most of this tier 1 stuff next Monday if you develop this stuff. And again, a lot of you don't immediately have problems like this to solve, but this is an opportunity for us to get ahead of some serious problems down the line with MCP behavior. And I would very much like to never have to talk about this again. So let's make sure that we keep sampling in the box where it belongs. Key takeaways. Sampling has optimistic human-in-the-loop assumptions that are oftentimes not true. The spec gives implementers an easy spec-compliant path to zero oversight because it doesn't require any of it. Spec-compliant does not necessarily mean secure. My demo was spec-compliant and obviously not secure. And defense in depth is required. Like, the spec will not save you, and human in the loop will not save you because humans will bypass the human in the loop. So make sure that you are doing isolation and separate contexts for separate MCPs, and don't rely on any one layer. Like, again, we all are familiar with the sort of Swiss cheese model of security gates, where you slap enough porous gates together and you get a pretty good one from end to end. Right. So, and I'm asking you, an untrusted entity asking your LLM for completion should not happen without a human decision maker. Like, please just make that true. Like, that will make me happy. That will make all of you happy. We will all be happy. If you build MCP clients, mandate the approval UI, all of it, not just the lazy one that VS Code did. Like, the whole thing. Like, do you want to run this sample? Here's the sampling prompt request. And I don't know, wrap it around, strip all the white space out of it, make sure no one does click fix style nonsense. If you have influence over specs or standards, push to elevate human in the loop from should to must. I will do my best, but like, more people being loud and annoying about it makes it more likely to happen. And if you audit MCP deployments, flag auto-approving sampling handlers as a critical finding. Like, that's bad. Just don't let that happen. So we gave people an easy path to the spec. Let's make the right path easier. And I will, at this point, basically take questions. Questions? Yeah. Yes.
Was sampling actually part of like the main spec when it came out, or was this like an addendum to it? Can you tell?
Sampling was part of the early specs because I've been looking at MCP stuff for a while. Wow. And one of the reasons that I started working on this talk like over a year ago is I looked at that and I'm like, this is crazy. Why would we do this? Sure. This is stupid dangerous. And it turns out that a lot of the implementers did the incremental, because implementing like a fully functional LLM client with all of the nice shared context and like passing context between the user's loop and like is actually non-trivial amounts of work, and it's a lot easier to do the stupid text only spin up so like right now it's too much work to do the dangerous way in a real application. It's easy to make the stupid dangerous thing in a toy application that basically lets me go, hey, look, this is dangerous and we should care about it. Like I made that in like a week, right? And spent some time turning it. But like deploying that level of capability into VS Code is like a quarter of work. So, and given that the adoption started in like last summer, I think over the next year or so, we're going to see more sampling picked up. Because like the other thing is like until last summer, no one implemented sampling. It was on everyone's roadmap, but no one had done it yet. VS Code is one of the first like big projects to actually like have meaningful sampling implemented. So it's kind of one of the like the reason that I was like, yes, I need to give this talk like now is because I still have the opportunity to head this off at the pass before it becomes a big problem and people are like, I found 10 CVEs in every single client that implements sampling because they all made the same mistake. I'm like, let's just not make that mistake. So, does that answer your question?
It does, yeah.
All right, cool. Anyone else? Happy to answer questions about MCP in general. You can tell me how much you hated my demo.
I love your jacket, by the way.
Thank you. Oh, sweet. I'm actually basically on time. Yes. Oh, and if you want my slides, there's a QR code for slides.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.